11 more hostages freed from Gaza. We know that we've extended 2 more days. To Kailey's point, likely 20 hostages that we're talking about in return. This is something that the White House is carefully taking credit for without celebrating. And it sounds like the question right now is how long they can keep this going.
Well, President Biden, so far so good, Joe. I mean, they are taking credit for this without spiking the proverbial football, right? Celebrating. We heard President Biden yesterday say that he wanted to see this extend, that he thought that the way the framework of the talks had been set up was for it to be able to extend further than it had initially been planned. We're seeing that come to fruition now today, 24 hours later, with the truce, prolonged, if you will.
And of course, this is something that the administration had been pushing for, and again, involved heavily in this. We actually heard from the National Security Council Coordinator for Strategic Communications, John Kirby, speaking with reporters about this at the briefing today. Here is what he said. Note how many times he used the word humanitarian.
We welcome the announcement just a little bit ago, I think in the last hour or so, by Qatar, that the humanitarian pause in Gaza, now in its 4th day, will be extended for another 2 days through Thursday morning Israel time. This humanitarian pause has already brought a halt to the fighting, together with a surge of humanitarian assistance. Now, in order to extend the pause, Hamas has committed to releasing another 20 women and children over the next 2 days.
Mario, I read that as a reflection of the fact that it's getting a little bit more difficult politically for this administration to balance support for Israel with the humanitarian considerations and a rising civilian death toll in Gaza.
No, I mean, that's spot on, Kailey. And I mean, this is specifically particular to the Democratic Party, right? That's where you're seeing some of these fissures play out. With the Republicans, there's stalwart support for it, right? You're seeing traditional Republican stances come to the fore here. But with Biden, he's going back and forth between his more centrist nature, but also the progressive wing of the party, right? You got senators like Bernie Sanders and et cetera agitating for more from Israel in terms of a ceasefire there.
Let's talk about the battle over funding. You referred to it. Kailey, we heard from Speaker Johnson talking about it. And Megan, it sounds like there are more roadblocks as time goes on here. We heard from Mike Turner over the weekend, who chairs the Intelligence Committee in the House. He spoke on Meet the Press about his skepticism that this gets over the finish line before the end of the year.
I think it'd be very difficult to get it done by the end of the year. And the impediment currently is the White House policy on the southern border. The White House in this package, including it as a national security package, recognizing that the southern border is a threat, put in funding, but it's going to need policy changes. Congress is going to require that there be laws changed to make certain that the border returns to its prior state, perhaps remain in Mexico, other types of provisions that would secure the southern border.
So not only are we trying to manage a hostage crisis in this case, also figure out how to fund the government, but apparently, Megan, have a breakthrough on comprehensive immigration reform before the end of the year. The congressman says unlikely. How about you?
And immigration reform is something that has eluded Congress for a generation now, and they want to get it done before Christmas. So what Republicans want to do is, you heard Congressman Turner discuss it, is to really restrict the flow of asylum seekers from Mexico into the United States. And they want to tie that specifically to Ukraine spending. Whether or not this all gets wrapped into the broader package with funding for Israel and funding for Taiwan remains unclear. But it seems as though border and Ukraine are going to be linked no matter which way you cut it in the coming weeks.
Well, and if you pay attention to what Majority Leader Chuck Schumer wrote in his Dear Colleague letter over the weekend, he says, hey, this could come to the floor as soon as next week, December 4th. How realistic is that timeline, Megan?
Well, I think the Senate could certainly bring something up. And what that is going to be is unclear, whether it's Ukraine and border, whether it includes Israel, whether it includes what the administration has requested for Taiwan. But getting it through the Senate and getting it through the House are two very different things. They are going to need to come to some kind of a compromise. The House has already passed an Israel-only aid bill. The Senate has been reluctant to move out on that because they want to ensure that Ukraine gets funded. And now you have this, as Mario pointed out, you have Democrats in the Senate who are really angling on Israel funding to tie it to conditions, pledges from Israel that they will adhere to humanitarian, law in terms of how it's dealing with Gaza.
So, Mario, what does the president think about this? Speaker Johnson's already started slicing up this request. We saw Israel move as a standalone, as already mentioned. He says he'll bring all 4 of these to the floor separately. Does the White House have some openness to the idea of unlocking these into separate bills?
Well, the White House will have to play with the cards it is dealt, right? Yeah. I mean, the initial plan was for it to all be connected, Taiwan, Ukraine, and then Israel funding. The White House didn't want to see anything separated. But again, I mean, this is the reality that we're in right now, where they have to, I mean, to Megan's point, you have to come to the table with some type of deal here. Dealing with with the House Republicans at this moment, there doesn't seem to be much bend or push. And then to Kailey's point as well, I mean, in terms of Ukraine, there is public sentiment that shows some support for Republican stances that the border ranks more prominently than Ukraine funding. So Mike Johnson does have a point there.
Yeah, that's shown up in Bloomberg's polling with Morning Consult just a few weeks ago. You talk, though, about House Republicans. And, Megan, there is a possibility here that the number of Republicans in the House of Representatives is going to get smaller, potentially just in a number of days. Congressman George Santos going to face down another expulsion vote. But it feels like this one he might actually lose. What do you think?
He said so himself during a Twitter.
Sees the writing on the wall.
Yes,
that was
he
quite
did.
a broadcast.
That was 3 hours, I think.
A
very stream of conscience. But the House needs 2/3 to expel a member. This is something that has not been done in more than 20 years. Jim Traficant was the last House member to be expelled. Only 5 in the history of the United States Congress have been expelled from the House. And George Santos could be up against that this week. The 2 previous expulsion motions, they did not succeed. But this now comes in the aftermath of a really eye-popping report from the House Ethics Committee that really detailed the extent to which Santos misused funds that were for his account for Botox, for OnlyFans, a honeymoon in Vegas, pretty much anything you could imagine. So now you're seeing Republicans say, okay, maybe we don't need to wait for a conviction. This guy should go.